Hello, world. I like so much that sound. Today we have a big show, and with me, my camera is having fun. But today with me, I have Maxime Rouillet. Hello, my friend. How are
Hi.
you?
Hey there. I don't know. Pretty well. We're not winter yet, but we're working on this, right? Vive le
Excellent.
Quebec.
Yeah. So before we jump straight into like the show, today we're talking about Microsoft Identity. But do you want to talk a little bit about introduce yourself, who you are?
Oh, yeah. How many people knows me, right? All right. So my name is Maxime Rouillet. So if you want to say it properly, that's more or less like it. But otherwise, just everyone call me Max. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and my focus is on the education crowd. So, like everyone in that audience, it's very fun. And yeah, so I've been doing consulting and I've been doing stuff like that before. I've worked on identity. I work on .NET, JavaScript. I've done a whole bunch of different stuff. What about you? What have you been working on?
I've been working on Hello World, sir. But today we have an expert with us. So we have Christos.
What's up, everyone?
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm not in Quebec, so it's not as
Oh.
cold, but Seattle is still fall-ish,
All
and
right.
the temperature is going down, but I can still wear my t-shirt, which is good.
And yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I've
It's pretty
well-
nice here too. Christos, we met a few days ago to record multiple demos. Do you want to share with us, kind of tease people to know what they should expect of this show? Like we have 4 demos, right?
We got 4 demos, and they're all focused on identity. So if you haven't used Microsoft Identity before, it is a Microsoft service that allows you to add authentication and authorization to your services, but it can do so much more, like DevOps, allows you to connect with secretless, with other services without having to add any secrets because it's all backed by Azure AD. And today we're going to show how to secure web apps. We're going to show you a couple of tools that allow you to automate part of the process. So not only speeding up the code, but also how you can configure Azure AD without actually going to Azure AD. And then we have APIs as well. And everything that we show you should be, you should be able to find them in the docs. And we have a Microsoft Learn module that you can go and complete and learn more. And yeah, it's going to be super exciting.
And all along, when you're not on camera, you will be in the chat answering the questions. So we are taking your questions all along. Answer in the chat or in the comment if you're watching a replay. We'll definitely find Christos back, find him so you get the answer. So like that's you asking question to Christos and the Microsoft Identity team. But today we have I need to have like a sound effect, but we have the question of the day, and it's Christos asking you questions. So which identity provider have you used to secure your apps? Microsoft Identity, Auth, Okta, Ping, or none, because you did it yourself. So I created a super little QR code here, so you could even take your phone right now. Stay with us while you're filling that anonymous little form, or if you prefer, just answer A, B, C, D, E in the chat. That's also totally fine. But I thought a little form was fun. So do that. We'll collect that and we'll share your answer to Christos because he want to know. So I thought it was a good idea. What do you think?
Well, I've rolled my own before, and before times, and it was a terrible idea. So obviously, you need something a little bit more structured and made by people that are more expert at protecting your system.
For people who want to get started the good way, or at least using the Microsoft Identity, Christos, can you we're ready to watch the first demo you did, but do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, saying like what you do, like your work?
Yeah. Sounds good. So I'm a developer advocate for the Microsoft Identity team. My goal is to help you, all the developers out there, to be slightly more secure and more robust when it comes to building applications, whether it's mobile, desktop, web, or services, right? The whole point is that if you are accessing data and if you are interacting with users that you need to know what they can do, then you need to have a system that allows you to authenticate and authorize. And Maxim said that he rolled his own. I've rolled my own in the past, and it seems like an easy thing to do until you start getting into the weeds, like multi-factor authentication or conditional access, token management. How can you avoid brute force attacks? There are, news that are bombarding us every week with yet another company making the news because their data got hacked. Like cyber attacks are all over the place. It will be about $10 billion worth of damage this year alone from cyber attacks, which equates to about $3.8 million per company out there globally. That's a lot of money to, when you think about it. And we as developers have the responsibility to, protect our data, protect our assets, and protect our users. So the demos today will show you how you can get started, how easy it is to get started. And even though we're focusing a little bit on .NET and we're heavy on .NET for these demos, everything that we show you should be available on every language that you use out there: Java, JavaScript, Node, Python, and what have you. And if we don't provide support for those languages, then there are open source libraries that work with OpenID Connect and OAuth2. So
Perfect.
That's our goal. Yeah.
Let's roll that demo to learn more.
Web apps.
Hey Christos, I'm a .NET developer. Can you show me how do I secure a brand new app using an identity provider?
Absolutely. Now, you don't have to be. It doesn't have to be a brand new application, but the code that will show you should be applicable to anything that is .NET Core 3 or later. So The easiest way to get started is let's do a greenfield project. So .NET new web app. I can't even type. And then we'll do --auth just to signify that we want to use authentication. And then we'll do single org, which is the Azure Active Directory tenant I want to use. Now, at this point, it will create a template, but there's no configuration. Let's open this in code and see what we have. I'm using .NET 6, by the way, so it's all the latest and greatest. And in here, we're going to go into the app settings. There's a lot of things that we need to fill in here. But the main code is here. Let's hide that. On line 10, yes. On line 11 and 12, we're saying I want to use authentication and I want to secure a web app. And it pulls the section from Azure AD in the config. Then we have a default authorization policy, which in effect tells our application you need to authorize any user that comes to this app. The first thing they have to do is sign in. If you don't sign in, you can't go anywhere. And then we apply that with use authentication and use authorization. From a code perspective, this is all you need to do to get started. Now, we just need to jump very quickly to the portal to actually create an app registration that will work with our application. So here I'm using my Microsoft developer tenant. If you don't have a tenant, I would urge you to go to the Microsoft 365 developer program and sign up. You get a P2 or P1. You get a P1 Azure Active Directory for free to use, including data, OneDrive, SharePoint, and what have you, plus some dummy users, which makes your life a lot easier. You don't have to mess with your IT team and ask them for permissions. You'll be a god managing this Azure AD tenant. And that's what I do for most of my demos. So here we're going to create a new app registration. You go to app registrations, you click new registration.
So
and then
go for it. The app registration, I'm sorry, I kind of cut you. The app registration for everybody, that's kind of the new, that taking place to the app user password that we used to do back in the day, right?
Yeah, so for us, there are two things that you need to do when you start with Microsoft Identity. One, or in fact with any identity provider, it doesn't have to be the Microsoft Identity provider, but you have to create a registration, an application. So if you ever use Twitch or Twitter or anything else to authenticate users, you need to go there in the developer portal and create an app registration or registration. This, in effect, tells the platform that you're going to use that to authenticate users, either OpenID Connect or OAuth2 if you need to get some access tokens.
Okay,
that's exactly what we're doing here. An app registration inside Azure Active Directory signifies to the directory that we're going to be using it to authenticate our users. So if we go back to the screen, I'll give it a name. I'm saying I'm only going to sign in users for my directory. I'll leave everything else blank. So I will press register. And then in here, we have some important information. So we want the application ID to pass back to our code. Is that the right one? Yeah, that's the right one. So app settings, we have to the client ID. And then we need a tenant ID, which I need to capture again from the portal. So switching here, that's our directory or tenant ID. We will add this here as well. I will add the domain name, which is my name because I am Bain, Matskas.onmicrosoft.com. And I'm leaving everything else as they are. I need to make sure that I press save because otherwise it won't work. I'll also remove the comments because I hate the squiggles. So let's save again. And now all I need to do is just finish up inside Azure Active Directory in our app registration. We need to say what is signing in or how we're signing in. We need to add a platform. So it's a web app. It's a server-side web app. And our redirect URI, this is where we expect to receive our ID tokens. This is where Azure Active Directory will send back the tokens or the code for the OAuth flow. And if that's wrong and doesn't match our application, then this is where things fall apart. So localhost, because we're running locally using Kestrel, localhost, and then 5001, that's our default port, and then OIDC, I forgot. And you can find that, which is also a good way to sign in OIDC. There you go, that one. I need more coffee this morning. Okay, and then we'll press save and run it. Should it here? Sign in OIDC. OIDC. We need to click on those and configure. That's all we need. So now, if we go back to our app or the console, we can use the console. Well, that's the right one. So .NET, let's clear this. And .NET run. Will it work?
So we configure the portal. We now, when we brought the identifier in our config app, and now we're building. So two of them should talk to each other.
Oh, what? Look, .NET 6 has added random ports there, which I didn't realize. So now, remember how I said that things will not work if we don't have them configured properly? Then it's 7254. Thank you, .NET 6, for adding this nice twist over there. So 7254 was it, right? 7254. Save.
I'm sure there's a good reason why it's that. Maybe because you run it parallel or something like that.
Is it? I don't
know.
I haven't run the RC yet, so that's the first time I'm actually testing the RC. So this is going to be a good test. So let's browse. Okay, that's a good step. Good. Permissions requested, and because I'm already signed in, it's actually going into, and we signed in. There you go. A few seconds.
Wonderful. That was easy. So just like that, we can get started with .NET and securing your app. Well, thank you. And now it's time for the question in the chat. And just like that. So that's the show. We show you a little demo, and then we have a short Q&A. So while you see the demo, please type your question in the chat, and then we'll ask them live to Christos, kind of, put him in the corner, force him to answer those questions. I was watching the chat, and I was seeing, I'm not myself, talking about keys, and it make me think, those keys that we put in the code. Is it dangerous when we display them on screen, or is it risk? What those keys represent as a privacy data?
Yep. Those GUIDs that you saw there, the application ID or the client ID and the tenant ID, in fact, the tenant ID can be replaced with a URL. You don't have to have the exact GUID there. It will still work. And the client ID is not a secret. So if somebody knows that, it's not sensitive information. What would have been sensitive information is if I was using a client secret, which if you are using auth code with Pixie, you need to actually provide a client secret. Okay. And that is something that you need to keep secret. Now, the right way to go about that is to probably put it in Azure Key Vault and then pull it out at runtime or at startup so you can populate the config value. And therefore, you don't have any secrets in your application. But the right way that you should be doing it, and we are working on that, is to move away from implicit flow, which we used for this example, and use auth code with Pixie that would require a client secret. And that secret is important because technically it's like a username and password, and a code is using our web app would be using that information to authenticate against Azure Active Directory.
Okay, but the tenant ID and the others are
That is correct.
safe.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. Max, we have about 1 minute and a half before moving to the next demo. Do you have did you see any question?
I had a question about the code that you saw. I had something called way before the demo. It was talking about IDOE. I don't even know what that is. If you know what that is, I have maybe that could be interesting. Otherwise, personally, I'm wondering if which version of .NET actually that kind of stuff works with. So, hey, how can you help with that?
Yeah. So what we saw today simplified quite a few things, and we abstracted quite a bit of the code that requires you to authenticate. And as you saw, it only took like 2 lines of code and some configuration settings to make it all happen. This is all Microsoft Addend.web, the new library that we pushed out last year. So it's not as new anymore, right? It's like a year old. But it allows you to do quite a few things without writing a lot of code. Microsoft Addend.web works with .NET Core 3.1 and later. If you are using any version before that, like .NET Core 2 or maybe the full framework, then you have to use the MSAT library, the Microsoft Authentication library. That still allows you to do that. It's just a little bit more verbose and requires a little bit more code, but it's all doable.
Pretty cool.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, Frank, do you have any other questions?
No, I think the time is flying now. We should continue with our next segment. Hey, Jean-Marc. So Christos showed us the way to create those things manually. Is there a easier way or a smarter way to do this?
Oh, you mean to do the app registration? Yes, Frank. There is actually, even if you want to work on the command line, you can use a tool that will do what I name code first app registration. Christos had to go to the portal. We are going to just remain in the tools we know, the command line tool. So let's do it.
Let's do it.
So I'm going to do like Christos. So do a .NET new application. Maybe let's change a bit. Have a Blazor server. I don't know if that's what you want. I'm going to do the --auth single-or. So I think Christos did the same. I'm going to say that I want to call the graph, Microsoft Graph. So get a call from Microsoft Graph. And I'm tempted to immediately use the tenant ID, specify the tenant ID. So that doesn't matter if I do it now or if I do it later, but I'm tempted to do it now, and I've pasted actually no, didn't do it. So I'm going to take it. I have a tenant ID for my kind of demo, because if I use my tenant ID, professional tenant ID, this is not as good. We don't have all the authorization
of course
to work inside our
so
company.
It means for the user, as a developer, I need to have admin roles when I want to run that command, or at least enough permission. Yeah,
that's a good point. You need to be able to create or update applications. So I'm going to use this tenant ID, which I copied from another screen. I'm going to paste that up. Yeah. So that's the command, .NET new, Blazor server, authentication single-off means Microsoft Identity Platform. I'm going to call the graph, and I'm pre-specifying the tenant ID. So I press return. This is going to create, as you know, the application in this folder. You see the time, it's just now. I'm going to use VS Code to look at the app settings.json. And we see that, like was the case for Christos, nothing is filled in here except the tenant ID. The tenant ID is already provisioned. It's already done here. So now the next step is, how do I get a new app registration? So that will be fairly simple. So let me put that in the background. I'm going to use a command line tool named MS Identity App Sync, and to install it, it's a .NET Global tool. So you'll get a link with the video. The way to use it is just say MS Identity App sync. And then that's it. It will see that the project is a Blazor server, so it's a kind of web app. It will find the tenant ID from the app settings.json, and you see that it has created a new application, and it has added the tenant ID, client ID, and domain in the app settings.json. And for the secret, so that's when I reopen this window, you see that they have changed. And for the user secrets, they are really in the .NET secrets. So .NET Core maintains some secrets. So that's it. The app registration is done. Now I just need to do a .NET run to see my application running. This Blazor server application. So I'll be able to sign in and see my full name because it's going to query the graph. If you want to see a bit more in detail what that does, I think I can open the controller and we could see, so it must be in temp, demo, hello world. And if I want to have a look at the pages, this show profile page, which I'm going to run, you see we are going to query the graph and get just my name, just get the user and display the user display name. Mm-hmm. So that's what we are going to do. It's building. Oh, okay, pretty long. Oh, it's running. So I'm going to just open a terminal and navigate to this URL, and that will be. I mean, the work is done already. We could say
so fast.
Yeah, the app registration was the rest of the demo is just show that works.
Let's prove that it actually runs, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of important.
So I'm going to go. I am also a guest of this tenant, so I'm going to go to this tenant. Of course, I'm subject to multiple factor authentication. So let me approve that on my phone, which I just did. So that signed me in. That's a new application, you see. So it tells me, do you want to allow this application to access your profile? I'm going to say yes. I'm not going to consent on behalf of the application. It turns out that I'm also an admin of this tenant. And this is the classical
scaffold application.
Scaffold, exactly. And for the show profile, it's going to create the graph. You've seen this little fetching, and then that's it. So that was showing how we can do an app registration from the code first app registration. The code was there, and then you can use this app MS Identity App Sync tool, which has many options, but I will let you discover that. You can start from I could have provided the tenant ID here, for example, but I will let you discover that in the README, which is there and which is so big that I don't know if you see anything.
Well, thank you. We'll make sure to put all those links in our show notes. Thank you. And now let's go back to see the question from the chat. That was cool. That was a nice demo. But Christos, that wasn't you?
That wasn't me. That was one demo I didn't do for today.
Him with wetter hair,
who was
right?
that gentleman? You want to introduce him?
Yeah, Jean-Marc is awesome. He's a PM on our SDKs team. So he works on building and integrating with things like, obviously, Microsoft Identity from the SDK's perspective, but also with tooling like Visual Studio and the .NET CLI to allow you to do things like file new project and then add authentication, or working on tools like this to help you set up your Azure Active Directory without really having to go to the portal, which allows you to be more versatile as a developer. You don't have to switch context all the time. Yeah, and if you have any questions, they manage the Microsoft Identity.web repo. So if you have any questions for them, you can find them there. You can find them on our Discord channel. So anywhere you want to ask questions, or if you have any issues or recommendations, then you can find us in so many places.
Yeah, and to be clear, Jean-Marc was supposed to be there. He got a conflict. We were hoping that he could join, but he didn't. So I hope everything is going well, Jean-Marc, and see you next time.
Yeah.
So that was one thing I was wondering when I was watching his demo is, well, it was a brand new project. What if I already have a project? Can I if I run that command? What?
So the nice thing is that if you run that command, it will override the existing settings and it will set up a new one. If you already have an app registration with that same name, it will not create a new one. It will find it and then will pull that information into your code. So in effect, if you have the scaffold already, but you haven't have the settings, it will do it for you. There is also the need in some cases that you have to actually go and configure the code. So let's say you have a web app that's been running for a while and your manager says, I need to add authentication. To do that retrospectively, you still have to do a little bit of coding. Now we're working with the Visual Studio team to allow you to retrospectively add authentication through the connected services. So you'll be able to right click on the project and say add authentication, and it will pull all the necessary libraries, NuGet packages, and add the necessary templates in the code.
Without changing everything else that is not identity related. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So
that's nice.
Are we planning to integrate that into any of our toolings? Like, is that something that we have as a plan?
That's a great question. Jean-Marc also manages that relationship with the Visual Studio tools. So the idea is that, yes, that we want to integrate that. Right now, it's a separate tool. So it's not part of the .NET Core commands. So it's a global tool that you can download. And that's the way that we go with a lot of supplemental supporting tools. In Visual Studio, the expectation is that I should be able to do it from the IDE. So we're adding that there. And for VS Code, we are working on a separate tool that's built truly on the core component of VS Code extensions platform that will allow you to do both, add identity to a brand new greenfield project or retrospectively add identity to an existing project. Yeah. I'm going to follow up with Kurt Donnelly's question from the chat where he's asking about identity resilience and some of the features that are coming. On the 4-5 show, we also have an IT Pro segment that cover these things. So, and I think on Discord, that information has also been shared. There's a lot of work on resiliency that is coming, including protocol-based, like continuous access evaluation, which is going to be awesome for long-lived tokens. And then resiliency on the platform itself, which will allow you to cache your tokens and retrieve them later. And then if something happens to the actual Azure Active Directory, you can still access your services without having to rely on Azure AD. So a lot of work there. And this, I've also pasted a couple of documents in the chat that show you how to build a resilient app as well. So sometimes it's not the backend platform, it is the actual code implementation. So you need to be careful about that as well.
So
that's pretty cool.
We mentioned something, and we kind of have like this indirect advertisement in the back of your screen that is super fun, like the 425 show. Like, what is that? Where can people find that?
Well, if you like what you see today and you want to learn more about identity, then the 4-5 show, it's a Twitch stream. And we also have a YouTube channel where we archive all our streams, where we talk about identity end-to-end. And sometimes that covers things like .NET with Microsoft Identity. Sometimes we do Python or JavaScript, and we show people how to use identity to write secure apps. And we'll cover more end-to-end scenarios. So rather than going the docs and finding like one component and then having to fish for the rest one, we'll show you how to create a web app, add identity, then put it into DevOps, and then publish it to production and what that entails. So when you leave the show, you have a good idea that if you want to do, say, Azure Functions with identity, right? Then we show you everything end-to-end.
Very interesting. So now we're very close to jump on the next demo. And it was you, that one, right?
I guess so.
So since the beginning, we see a lot of .NET. So is it just .NET? Can we see, is there other supported languages to work with identity?
That's a great question again. So the Microsoft Identity Platform supports most all of the main frameworks and languages out there. So we do have an official library called MSAL. If you still use ADAL, by the way, you should hurry up and migrate to MSAL because ADAL is our older library is going out of support at the end of June 30th of this year. 2022, yeah. This financial year at Microsoft terms. At the end of June, we'll supporting ADAL. So MSAL is the way to go. And MSAL is available in most of the major frameworks and languages. So if you're doing JavaScript, then we have React and Angular helpers. We do have a pure breed MSAL.js library. If you're doing .NET, we have MSAL.NET. Same for Java, same for Python. But if you are in a language that is either very new or we don't have a library for you, then you can use any open source OpenID Connect library. So if you're doing Go, we do have an experimental MSAL, but if you want to go with something more mainstream and tested, you can use that. If you are working, say, with PHP, you do have the option of using any OAuth library. And the other day I was working with Next.js, and there's not an official Next.js package for Microsoft Identity. So I just went and grabbed an open source one and made it work. So there you go.
Wonderful. Okay, so you know what? Let's continue our journey and watch this next demo. Christos, we saw how easy it was to use identity when we are creating web app, but is it different? What do we need to do differently when we're talking about APIs?
Well, quite a few things have changed in the .NET space, and .NET 6 is just around the corner, which is super exciting. But when creating APIs, the major difference is that there's no UI to interact with. So your APIs need to still be secure, and they need to check for certain things. First is that the token is valid, and secondly, that the incoming access token contains the right permissions. Sometimes people only do half of it, and then everything is fair game once they pass through the door. So always make sure that you check for certain permissions as well. And this time I'm going to show you how to do a .NET 6 minimal API, which is super fun, just using Azure Active Directory B2C. So in this instance, we're going to be using consumer accounts, not an Azure Active Directory account that is part of your organization. So maybe a web app or a mobile phone app calls into an API to grab some data from a backend. And I'll show you how to do this. So again, if we switch to my console, we'll do .NET new web API. And then here we're going to do dash-auth. But this time I'm going to do individual B2C.
Okay.
And this is going to create our API, and we will open it in code. It opens a new window, which is always fun. Too many screens, that's the problem. Let's say that. And you notice that there's only program, there's no startup.cs, and there are a few things missing, like top-level namespaces and stuff like that. I see controllers here, and I don't like controllers, so let's remove them. No controllers. We'll add everything in line, just like Node. If you've done Node before, then you know that Node APIs tend to be inline sometimes to make our life easier. And the app settings are going to be slightly different this time because we are using B2C, so there needs to be a sign-in and sign-up policy. We're going to cheat a little bit, and we're going to go copy-paste because I want to show you exactly how things work. So first of all, let's grab the settings. And then we will jump to Azure Active Directory B2C to show you where these are coming from. So we have our API app registration like we did before, and I will show you that in a bit. And then we're going to add some code in the program.cs. So here I'm just going to grab my code, and we're going to dump it into program.cs. Control A, Control V. So what's happening here? This is not the right name. I need to use that namespace. And then you write it here. And you notice that, again, we brought everything in here where we are still using the authentication. This time we're doing web API. We are also configuring CORS, because if you're going to be calling your API, you need to have CORS, otherwise you're going to fail, and you don't want to be caught by that. And then we have one public endpoint, the map-get weather forecast, right? And then in here, we're doing two things. One is we're requiring authorization, so we need to make sure there's an access token passed in our request. If that's not there, then we're going to get a 401. But inside here as well, we also say that any incoming request needs to have a valid scope. So not only do I need to authenticate against Azure Active Directory B2C, but I also need to have the right permissions in my account. And in here, the permission is access as user. So let's jump very quickly to Azure Active Directory B2C to see how this is configured. So we have the minimal API.NET, .NET 6. So I'm clicking on this one. And in here, let me zoom in a little bit. We are exposing an API. That's the API here, and that's the fully resolved API namespace. And that's what is used by our API right now. And then we also have an app registration for our client, like something that is calling our API. And we'll use one of the Visual Studio Code extensions to actually run a demo. But here we have the authentication, which is going to be using Thunder Client and VS Code. And under API permissions, we do have that API that is coming from our API, and we've consented to that because users cannot consent in B2C. And with that, we're ready to actually test it. So let's go back into our code and run the API. Let's see, actually, no. Is VS Code going to barf? Because I think there's one thing missing from here. And I think what is missing is the fact that, oh no, it's here. Implicit usings enabled. If you don't do that, then it's going to complain about missing namespaces or missing usings. The fact that it's there, it's all good. So yeah, we're ready to run it. So .NET run. Is it going to open a random port again? I'm curious.
Like, I'm assuming it will be the same port.
Well, you know what they say about assumptions. Let's see, I think because it's an API, we don't really have a redirect URI, which is great. It just means that we can go directly and test it. So it doesn't really matter. Yes, there's no redirect URI here. So that's good. Okay, but we need to go into our VS Code now and use Thunder Client. Thunder Client is one of my favorite tools because it allows me to test things quickly without having to worry about having a separate tool here for API. So I think it's at the very top. Just need to change the port number, which I don't remember. Do you remember what? I think it's 7148. And obviously, here I've got my authentication configuration, which you can't see because everything is so minimized. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you guys can see it. But I'm actually using my app registration settings in B2C to authenticate. So I'm going to generate a token. Yep, that's generate a token. So if we close this one, save success. So now I have a valid token, and now I can call my API, and it will fail. The tenant ID option must be provided. Tenant ID token, that should be provided in the configuration, I think. Do we not have that? Oh, tenant ID, fine. I didn't think that we needed that before. Did something change in the code? Tenant ID. And we can find that in the portal.
But like that shows also that it like the error kind of error message if something is missing, so we can see that.
Yeah.
Grab the information, same page in the portal, like it's a one stop for all. We just add the line in the config, we run, and it should work now.
It should. You're absolutely right. It should. Let's find out.
No pressure.
No pressure. So here, let's send again. And there you go. That's data. So things have slightly evolved, but the good thing is that, again, it doesn't take much to configure an API to make us more secure.
Well, thank you. And now let's go back to Studio for more questions. That was pretty cool. What do you think, Max?
I think that I'm going to need to learn more about this. I'm going to need to really dig into this, and I feel like I need some written content go through this. So where can I find some learning materials that I can learn at my own pace?
Well, the best place to get started is at Microsoft Learn. We have a fantastic library of all the things that are Azure and .NET and JavaScript and Python and Ruby. We add a lot of content there, and we do have a specific one for identity and a specific one for identity developers as well. So there's identity pros that can go and configure Azure and set the settings in the platform. But as a developer, I need to know how to interact and how to integrate. And there is a specific learn module or learn modules or a path that you can go and learn at your own pace. In fact, we also did a whole video play-by-play on that, adding some fun commentary. So if you want to watch the video instead of doing it yourself, then you can find that on our YouTube channel.
Wonderful. And all the links will be in the show notes that it was just displayed down below. Yes. Here it is again. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. I know you had a question that was burning Max about APIs and what's supported and not. Do you wanna go for it now?
How does it work with Azure Functions? Because
yes.
I'm a big serverless fan, and you kind of need to know like how does that work with like the technology I love the most. And I'm not doing like any self-promotion here. So
I know why you're saying that because, to begin with, Azure Functions is a fantastic way to build APIs, and it's usually my go-to when I have to build things. And identity is a major component. You don't want anyone to be calling your APIs, especially if it's accessing sensitive data. So Microsoft Identity.web, if you are building .NET apps, .NET functions, then Microsoft Identity.web, the package that we showed before, actually works with Azure Functions. We made it work, and there's a template for that as well. What you don't get is information for the token itself. So there are some extra packages as well. Like if you're using some like Easy Auth, then we can use your package. And you're not self-promoting, I am promoting you, but Maxime has a fantastic NuGet package for .NET that brings some claims into, the man, that brings some claims into your application. If you are building with .NET or Python or PowerShell, then you have to use the MSAL library to actually do the authentication authorization component in your functions. But it's fully supported, and it should be supported.
Wonderful. We still have about 1 minute. So is there a recommended way to create secure APIs moving forward?
A recommended way. I would say two things that you need to be aware of. Obviously, one is to always authenticate and authorize your users. Don't just let them through the door, but also look at what they can do, because different users will have different roles. And the other one is to try to communicate with backend services in a secure manner. So if you are running on Azure with Azure Functions, then managed identity is a great way to allow you or allow your functions to communicate with, say, Cosmos or SQL or other services without having any config settings or any secrets in your application.
Wonderful, thank you. And now it will be moving. I'm okay. I'm still there. We'll be moving to our next segment, because this show is technical, but at Microsoft, it's not only about tech, because we are human. So in this week's segment of Humans of Microsoft, Laurent is talking with Rory, and is asking him a question about moving. So let's watch that.
Okay.
Welcome back to Humans of Microsoft. This is a segment where we talk to people just like you and me, but they all have one thing in common. They all work for Microsoft. And today I'm really excited because I am here with my good friend, Rory Preddy. Hello, Rory. How are you doing?
Hello, Laurent. I'm doing great. It's winter here in the Southern Hemisphere, but I've got my anorak on. I've got my aircon, blowing hot air there. So I see all of the hotness going there, but I'm nice and chilled here.
That's very good to hear. Indeed, you are based in Johannesburg in South Africa, and you are a developer advocate for Java at Microsoft, because yes, we do also Java at Microsoft. This is really good to know. And Rory, you told me earlier on that for your job, you moved multiple times, right? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I've had an extensive career. I started off as an engineer, assisting financial services companies, and then I fell in love with Java and programming. And when I did that, obviously I needed to move out of my current city into other cities to try and get my career started there. And what I did discover around programming and development, it's really rich when it comes to the ecosystem and the ability to work from home, to work from multiple locations. You've got distributed systems, distributed deployment processes. And I discovered that programming isn't just on your laptop with you, it's everywhere around you. So I learned a lot about the DevOps process, programming and distributed. And I learned a lot about accessibility and trying to meet my own accessible needs while obviously trying to work in different jobs though.
So you mentioned earlier that you actually gathered a lot of experience about accessibility for people who want to move, right? Can you tell me more about that?
One of the things I learned is that you need to be upfront with your stakeholders, your jobs around your accessibility requirements. In the beginning of my career, I was shy. I didn't want to tell people that I needed a special chair. I couldn't drive too far because my back gets sore. I needed an adequate desk, a standing desk. And eventually I gained the confidence because I realized that if I can help myself, why can't I help others? And I started becoming an advocate for Microsoft and accessibility and speaking on programming for accessibility and reaching out to every developer to show them how Microsoft empowers people with tools like Accessibility Insights, with Immersive Reader, and it became a passion of mine now to reach out to every developer to show them how to make their career and their jobs easier by embracing accessibility.
Oh, this is fantastic. And you yourself just mentioned, right, Immersive Reader. This is an AI offering we have. How can actually AI help with accessibility and with your career in general?
So we're using AI right now. We don't even realize it. If you take your phone and you do predictive text, that's AI. But we're noticing that it's really helping in the way of what situational accessibility requirements. Like I need glasses, and maybe I want the font bigger, or I want something read to me while I'm doing two things at once. And those are situational accessibility requirements that are built into Office. So if you go to Microsoft Teams and to OneNote and to Word, there's an immersive reader that is built into those systems. You can click on the immersive reader and it brings you into an immersive accessible experience where you can change the font, you can change multiple languages. Your PowerPoint can do online to anyone around the world. So it's become really a human interaction with technology. And what we're seeing here is an emerging nature of accessibility, whereas before accessibility was bolt on. Now, if I change roles or change careers, I can be guaranteed, as long as I've got the Microsoft products on my laptop or on my desktop, I will have an accessible experience.
And this is really good to know, because then you don't have to specifically require them, right? This is just built in. That's really cool. So what is one more thing you want to tell our viewers to maybe inspire them?
Well, if you want to get started with accessible and create accessible documents, there's an accessibility checker on PowerPoint, on Word. You just click on that. So when you do your review for spelling, click on accessibility checker and it will help you. It's got some AI built in there and it's really great. So click on accessibility checker and let it do its job. It's what you want it to do. It'll check images, it'll check videos, captioning, and really great help that I've found it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for giving your fabulous insight about accessibility today. Thank you for being with us, and to all the viewers, join us next time on Humans of Microsoft. Thank you, Rory.
Cheers, everyone.
That was amazing.
That was amazing. There was two hosts of Hello World in season 1. Laurent was on every Monday, and Rory was my replacement when I couldn't be online. Always nice to see them.
And besides being very good show hosts, like they're also our colleagues, so we work with them and we kind of go through the same things that they're going through, right? So we notice more. So it's a good thing that we're talking about it.
Yeah.
So, hey, should we go back to the question of the day?
Oh, yeah.
We should.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. All right. Which identity provider have you used to secure your apps? A, Microsoft Identity Platform, or B, Auth0, C, Okta, D, Ping, or E, none. I roll my own. And if you're answering E, I'm a little bit scared, but that's fine. And don't forget, you can scan the QR code, or you can go to aka.ms/helloworld/Q2. Please enter that in the chat. Would love to know the answer to this question.
Can I call a friend?
You can call a friend. You can do whatever.
I don't know the answer. Can I call a friend?
If I'm the friend, I'm busy right now. I'm having a live stream, so you can call back later. Okay.
I will. I only have one friend. It's Maxime. So that's it.
That's wonderful. That next demo that we're about to see. That was a surprise. That Christos, right? You didn't share me anything about that before we start the recording. So I was.
I threw a curveball this time because I wanted to uncharted territory for both of us.
So let's watch that surprise you had for me.
Yep.
So Christos, I must like you a lot because that's the first time on Hello World that someone kept me in the fog. I have no idea what's your demo. So what it is.
That's because it's a total surprise. I'm going to show you how to actually configure Azure Active Directory in a CI/CD way using Python and Jupyter notebooks, which is very different to what we've shown so far. We can also achieve the same thing exactly with using .NET Interactive and .NET notebooks. So whatever I show you today, it's also achievable with .NET, but I like Python. Let's throw a curveball out there. Yeah, exactly. So I already have a Python project. I've created my virtual environment. So if I do ls, there's just one notebook and some requirements. And the requirements have some dependencies to the libraries that we need. So I'm going to open this in codes. And here we have our project, which doesn't really have anything other than print hello world once the Jupyter notebook activates. So there you go. We can run this now. And this doesn't do anything other than print hello. The requirements here have two dependencies. We have one for graph, so we can interact with Azure Active Directory, and then the other one is the Azure.identity, which we can use to authenticate to the graph. So instead of using MSAL, now we're using the Azure Identity, which works perfectly well. So we can use master identities and service principals. Let's go back to the notebook, and I'm going to cheat slightly by copying the code from my notes. And that will allow us to actually focus on the code rather than worrying about the other stuff. So this is it. Let me just grab it from here so it's not in our face. And the first thing we'll do is copy the code that we need to authenticate to Azure Active Directory. This in effect says we're going to use the interactive browser credential to grab and sign in the current user, i.e. me. And then we're going to ask for specific permissions, the scopes, which are about creating applications and reading the user profile. And with that, we can run it. Yes, to run notebooks, you need to have a specific extension. So let's activate this one. It's thinking about it now. It's taking some sweet time. It's what demos do. They require interactivity. It's thinking about it. But in the meantime, I'm going to grab the rest of the code. So when that completes, we can actually demo the whole thing.
Wonderful. So before I was having the connection issue, and now it's your turn.
No connection issues. We're all done. So I can run it, and it should work. Perfect. So now we need to just add one piece of code, which is here. And then what we're doing here is we're saying I want to create an API app registration, which we did before. And I want to pass some variables, and we're also going to create an API permission. So if you were to use this one to create an API app registration, this will do the whole thing for you and dump out the information you need to copy in your code. So let's run it. Here, it actually prompts for authenticating. I'm going to use my my account for my dev tenant. And then I'm authenticating. And I'm going to close this one very quickly and then come back here. It's running, and it's done. So I have my client ID, I have my domain, I have my tenant ID, all done for me via the notebook. And then I grab that information and dump it into my code, or I can automate part of the process and grab that information and pass it down further in my CI/CD pipeline to configure my web app as it deploys. And as you can see, this is a fantastic way for even expressing complex scenarios where we may need to have an API app registration with a client app registration and another client app registration maybe for a mobile app and a single page app. And we can express all these in one go. And because we're using the Azure Identity library, it means that we can also automate that by passing a different type of credential. So instead of an interactive browser credential, which I use to mainly show you how to do it, we can have service principal credentials with maybe a certificate instead of a secret, so we eliminate secrets from the interaction. Or we can use a managed identity with our, say, GitHub action in a custom runner to use that information to implement all these. And if you're interested, then I have a blog post showing you how to do all that for CI/CD and automating the Azure Active Directory component, which, as I said, usually trips people, and that's where they tend to mess things up and break the experience.
Wonderful. Well, we'll make sure to put everything. Let me, not that big, this big. I'll put everything in the show notes. Make sure everybody can read your blog post and all the rest. But for now, let's go see the question in the chat. That was cool. I was asking, I did a pop quiz in the chat asking about MSLA, and I really like people are creative in their answers. So that's pretty cool.
I particularly like the author instead of auth. Like author.
Yes. So I have one question. I didn't see any questions specific to that. People who liked it, we saw that. Who was it? Khalid was saying like that was cool. But is there other ways to automate? Because my Python is not very good Is there other ways to automate that?
Yeah, you can use Postman. You can use the REST API tool in VS Code, so you can write that whole thing as a REST call, because everything is an API, right? So what Graph in effect does, it's wrap around those REST API calls and do them for you, simplify the process. So REST, anything that can automate REST, in effect, REST calls can be used. Graph can be used as well. So you can write Graph with .NET and have a console app and execute a console app. Or you can use notebooks, because I like notebooks because they're more interactive. You can add Markdown as well to explain what each step does and how it works. So it's more about a learning tool rather than an automation tool. But the choice is yours.
Excellent.
Okay, entertain me for a minute here. I could technically use the .NET HTTP REPL. So by the way, if nobody knows that tool, it's incredible. You need to use it. So I could use the .NET HTTP REPL to do the whole thing, just purely come from the command line, no Postman, no other tools, just purely .NET, just through the command line.
And I think the .NET REPL has added support for authentication, right? Because that's the one thing that you need to do. You need to authenticate as a user first in order to be able to call into Azure Active Directory with the rest of the REST calls, right? So the first thing you need to do is acquire a token. How that token gets passed into your API tool doesn't really matter. So if it's supported out of the box, then perfect. If it's not supported, then you need to find a way to pass the token, acquire and pass the token.
So basically, it's cross languages, right? We can do all of this through any languages, including the one we don't support. So it's just left for the picking for anyone to just do the small integration that we need to do on this.
The nice thing about Graph is that it actually has strongly tied objects. So if you need to create an application, there's an application object, and then it makes your life a lot easier. Otherwise, you have to reverse engineer your REST calls, right? The payload needs to be reverse engineered so you know what to send. Now that's the trickiest bit. Graph makes that a lot more straightforward, because whichever language you use, then you can actually just grab that object in that language, and if it's JavaScript, TypeScript, or .NET or Java, and then make your life easier, so you don't have to work out all the properties that you need to pass in.
That's wonderful. And you know what, my friends? It's time to wrap up. So in this episode, you show, because like I was very passive, how to start with like a web app securely, also doing it a little bit more automatic way. Do it when it's an API, when there's no UI, right? It's like an API. And then automated that registration with Jupyter Notebook. That was pretty cool. That's a nice.
So it's a very cool demo. Like a whole bunch of demos that are like very, very. I'm very passionate about them. Let's just say it like that. And do we have any answers from our question of the day, or do you want to repeat it?
Question of the day, it was, which identity provider did you use? The options are there. You have the little QR code. We have a code answer in the chat, in the comment, and I will make sure to translate that to Christos. But for now, we'll also put it in the show notes. Everything is in the show notes. The show will be available on demand after, but stay tuned, because in a few minutes, Azure Fun Bite is coming up with Jay, and I'm sure it's very interesting. So have a good end of week, everybody, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.